promise me this moment will never end.
With you forever.
Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain hammered against the windows of the Bentley Continental like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into fractals of light against the tinted glass. Victor sat motionless in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the Italian leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned white as marble. The engine hummed quietly, a mechanical heartbeat in the storm, but he couldn't bring himself to turn the key. Not yet. Not when the words of Dr. Hawthorne still echoed in his skull like church bells tolling for the dead. Severely compromised sperm count, extremely low chance of natural conception without medical intervention. I'm sorry, Mr. Voss, but the damage from your childhood illness appears to have significantly impacted your fertility. 35 years old, master of a billion-dollar empire spanning luxury hotels from Dubai to Manhattan, tech companies that moved markets with a single press release, real estate portfolios that could buy small countries. Yet, he couldn't create the one thing that mattered more than all his accumulated wealth combined. A child. The fertility clinic's neon sign reflected in his rearview mirror, casting pink and blue shadows across his chiseled features. Even in devastation, Victor was beautiful in the way that old masters painted Angel Saul's sharp cheekbones and storm-gray eyes, dark hair swept back from a face that had graced magazine covers when he'd been named one of America's most eligible bachelors. That title felt like mockery now. His phone buzzed against the console. Isabella, his wife of 3 years, the former Miss Massachusetts who'd swept into his life with golden hair and calculated smiles. She'd be at their Beacon Hill mansion now, probably selecting wine for another charity function, where she'd spend his money and bask in the social credit of his success. The thought of telling her about Dr. Hawthorne's diagnosis made his stomach twist like rope. He'd married Isabella, believing she wanted the same things he did. A family, children laughing in their 15-room mansion, tiny feet running through gardens his mother had planted before cancer, took her when he was 12. But lately, he'd begun to suspect that Isabella's interest in children extended only as far as their potential to secure her position as his heir's mother. The realization that there might never be an heir would either devastate her or end. This thought chilled him more than the October storm reliever. Thunder cracked overhead like splintering wood. Victor finally turned the ignition, needing to move, needing to escape the suffocating weight of his new reality. The Bentley purred to life, and he pulled onto Newbury Street, Boston's slick arteries flowing with late-evening traffic. Normally, he'd head straight home to Beacon Hill, to the mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice, to the wife who posed perfectly in every photograph, but felt increasingly like a stranger, sharing his bed. Instead, he drove past the brownstones of Back Bay, through the neon wilderness of downtown, into neighborhoods where his wealth couldn't shield him from the raw honesty of human struggle. The rain seemed to wash the city clean, revealing its true colors beneath the veneer of civilization. Streetlights became halos in the storm, and every reflection in the wet asphalt looked like tears. His phone rang again. This time he glanced at the screen. Isabella. Home. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to her voice, crystalline and cold as winter champagne. Darling, the Harringtons are here for dinner. Where are you? This is embarrassing. Not worried, not concerned for his well-being embarrassed. Victor pulled over on a side street in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood his society friends would never venture into, and sat listening to the rain drum against the roof. Through the passenger window, he could see a small medical clinic, its windows glowing warm and yellow against the storm. A hand-painted sign read, Community Care Center, 24 hours. It looked nothing like the sterile marble and crystal palace where he'd just received his life-altering news. This place had heart, had soul, had the kind of authenticity his world had forgotten existed. That's when he saw her. A figure stumbled from the clinic's entrance, moving with the awkward, desperate gait of someone in pain. Even through the rain and darkness, even doubled over and struggling, she was breathtaking. Her skin was the color of caramel and starlight, her natural curls wild and beautiful in the storm. She wore scrubs, a nurse, he realized, but they were soaked through and clinging to a body that was clearly heavily pregnant. She took 3 steps before her knees buckled. Victor was out of the Bentley before conscious thought took hold, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles as he ran toward her. His $1,000 suit was instantly soaked but forgotten. She was on her hands and knees on the sidewalk, gasping, one hand pressed to her swollen belly while the other clutched the concrete. "Hey, it's okay," he said, dropping beside her without caring about the water soaking through his pants. Up close, she was even more stunning, with features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Eyes like liquid amber that held pain and fear, and a strength that took his breath away. "What's happening? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him, water streaming down her face, and he saw the exact moment she registered his appearance, the expensive clothes, the watch that cost more than most people's cars, the kind of masculine appeal that usually made women stammer. But she didn't stammer. If anything, her walls went up higher. "I'm fine," she gasped, clearly lying. Just need a minute." Another contraction hit her, because that's what this was. He realized with crystal clarity. She was in labor. Her back arched, and a sound escaped her that was part pain, part terror, part something primal and fierce that spoke to every protective instinct he'd never known he possessed. "You're having the baby," he said, stating the obvious because his brain seemed to have short-circuited. "Right now. We need to get you to a hospital." "Can't afford," she started, then bit off the words. Pride warring with desperation in her beautiful face. "The clinic was supposed to, but they don't do deliveries here. I was trying to get to Mass General, but the contractions." Another wave hit her, stronger this time. She squeezed her eyes shut, and Victor watched a single tear escape to mingle with the rain on her cheek. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside his chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves around his heart. "I'm taking you to Mass General," he said, scooping her up before she could protest. She was lighter than he'd expected, all baby and determination, her body trembling against his chest. "My name is Victor. What's yours?" "Layla," she whispered, then louder, with more strength. "Layla Carter. You don't have to. I can't pay you back for this." He carried her to the Bentley, rain streaming down both their faces, and something about the way she fit in his arms felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. "Nobody's asking you to," he said, settling her gently in the passenger seat. The leather would be ruined, but he couldn't have cared less. As he started the engine and pulled into traffic, Layla gripped the door handle through another contraction. "Why are you helping me?" she asked when she could speak again. "You don't even know me." Victor glanced at her profile, at the way the streetlights played across her face, and realized he couldn't explain it in any way that would make sense. How could he tell her that an hour ago he'd learned he might never be a father, and now here she was, bringing life into the world in his car, trusting him with the most vulnerable moment of her existence? "Maybe," he said quietly, navigating through the storm-dark streets toward the hospital. "We're both exactly where we're supposed to be." Thunder rolled overhead like applause from heaven, and neither of them spoke again until they reached Mass General, where everything would change forever. Chapter 2. The Birth of Miracles. Massachusetts General Hospital rose from the Boston night like a beacon of hope and healing, its windows glowing against the storm-dark sky. Victor pulled the Bentley up to the emergency entrance with the kind of controlled urgency that came from a lifetime of making critical decisions under pressure. The rain had softened to a steady whisper, as if even the weather was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Layla's contractions were coming faster now, each one stealing her breath and painting her beautiful face with shades of determination and fear. She'd gone quiet during the 10-minute drive, her hands pressed against her swollen belly, her amber eyes focused inward on the ancient dance between mother and child that was beginning its final movements. "We're here," Victor said gently, pulling up to the emergency bay. Before she could protest or insist she could walk, he was around the car and lifting her from the passenger seat. She felt different in his arms, now not just the weight of her pregnancy, but something indefinable, as if the shared intensity of their mad dash through the storm had created a connection between them that transcended the boundaries of strangers. The automatic doors whooshed open, and suddenly they were in the bright, antiseptic world of the hospital. A nurse at the triage desk looked up from her computer, took one look at Layla's condition, and immediately called for a wheelchair and an obstetrics team. "How far apart are the contractions?" the nurse asked efficiently. helping Layla into the wheelchair while Victor hovered nearby, unsure of his role but unwilling to leave. 2 minutes. Layla gasped. Maybe less. I think the babies are coming now. Babies? The nurse repeated, eyebrows raising. Plural? Twins, Layla confirmed. And Victor felt something flutter in his chest that was part excitement, part terror, and entirely overwhelming. Twinstwo lives about to enter the world, and somehow he was here to witness it. They wheeled Layla toward the elevator, and Victor found himself following, his expensive shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. The nurse glanced at him questioningly. Layla started, then seemed to realize she didn't know how to finish that sentence. He wasn't her husband, wasn't the father, wasn't even someone she'd known an hour ago. But he was here, and in this moment, that seemed to be enough. He brought me here. Are you the father? Doctor. Lynn, the on-call obstetrician, asked Victor directly as they reached the maternity ward. No, Victor said quietly. Just a friend who was in the right place at the right time. Doctor. Lynn nodded, already focused on Layla's medical needs. We'll need to get you into a delivery room immediately. These babies aren't waiting for anyone. What followed was a blur of controlled chaos, nurses appearing with equipment, monitors being attached, Layla being helped into a hospital gown while Victor waited outside in the hallway, pacing like an expectant father, despite having no right to the title. Through the partially opened door, he could hear Dr. Lynn's calm, professional voice guiding Layla through the process. First baby is crowning. This is it, Layla. Big push on the next contraction. Victor found himself holding his breath, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, had given presentations to boardrooms full of hostile investors with perfect composure, but waiting in this hospital hallway while a woman he barely knew brought new life into the world was undoing him completely. A cry split the air high, clear, and utterly perfect the sound of a baby taking its first breath, announcing its arrival to the universe with indignant surprise. It's a girl, Dr. Lynn announced, and Victor felt tears he hadn't expected spring to his eyes. Beautiful, healthy girl. But we're not done yet. Baby number 2 is right behind. Through the door, he could hear Layla's exhausted laughter, a sound like music and sunlight and everything beautiful in the world, condensed into pure joy. Stella, she whispered. Her name is Stella. 3 minutes later, another cry joined the first, deeper, stronger, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital. And we have a boy. Doctor. Lynn said. Perfect, healthy boy. Congratulations, Mama. You did incredible. Jasper, Layla said, her voice thick with tears and wonder. His name is Jasper. Stella and Jasper Star and Treasure. Perfect names for perfect babies, born in the middle of a storm to a woman who was stronger than anyone had a right to be. A nurse emerged from the delivery room, smiling. They're doing beautifully. Mom and babies are healthy. Would you like to meet them? Victor hesitated. He had no right to intrude on this most intimate of moments, no claim to these first precious minutes of new life. But something in Layla's voice called out to him. Victor, are you still there? I'd like you to meet them. He entered the delivery room on unsteady legs, and the sight that greeted him rewrote every definition of beauty he'd ever known. Layla lay propped against pillows, her dark hair spread like a halo around her face, her skin glowing with the ethereal radiance that seemed to surround new mothers. In her arms, she held 2 tiny bundles, one wrapped in pink, one in blue. Stella was delicate as spun glass, with skin like café au lait and a rosebud mouth that seemed designed for smiling. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were already alert and curious, as if she were taking inventory of this new world she'd been born into. Jasper was bigger, more solid, with his mother's caramel skin and tiny fists that seemed ready to take on the world. Even at minutes old, there was something determined about him. Something that spoke of strength and stubbornness, and the kind of courage that ran in his mama's veins. They're perfect, Victor whispered, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. Absolutely perfect. Layla looked up at him, and in her amber eyes, he saw exhaustion and joy, and something that might have been gratitude. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "You would have found a way," he said with absolute certainty. "You're stronger than you know." She laughed softly, adjusting Stella's blanket with practiced ease, despite having been a mother for less than 10 minutes. "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. These two perfect little humans are depending on me, and I don't have a job, don't have a home, don't have anything to offer them, except love." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. In all his years of privilege and wealth, he'd never truly understood what it meant to love someone so completely that you'd give everything for them while having nothing to give. But he saw it now in Layla's face, the fierce, protective love of a mother who would move mountains for her children if she had to. "Where's their father?" he asked gently. Layla's expression hardened, and for a moment, she looked dangerous. "Tristan abandoned us when he found out I was pregnant. Took money from his new girlfriend and disappeared. Said he wasn't ready to be tied down by complications." She looked down at her babies, her voice softening. "His loss. These aren't complications. They're miracles." Something cold and sharp twisted in Victor's chest at the thought of any man walking away from this, from Layla's strength and beauty, from these perfect children who deserved every good thing the world had to offer. Tristan, whoever he was a fool and a coward. "What will you do now?" Victor asked. Layla was quiet for a long moment, gently rocking Stella while Jasper slept peacefully in the crook of her other arm. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was working as a nurse at the clinic, but they can't hold my job forever. My apartment. I had to give it up last month when I couldn't work anymore. I've been staying at a shelter, but they don't allow infants." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'll figure something out. I have to." Victor felt something shift inside his chest, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. An hour ago, he'd been drowning in the knowledge that he might never be a father. Now, here was a woman who needed help, who had two perfect children, who deserved every opportunity in the world. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper. Something that felt like destiny. "I have a proposition," he said carefully. "I own an estate in Beacon Hill. There's a cottage on the property, beautiful, private, with its own garden. I need someone to manage the grounds, handle correspondence, that kind of thing. It comes with housing, full benefits, and a salary that would let you take care of your children without worrying about money." Layla stared at him as if he'd just offered to give her the moon. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Victor looked at Stella and Jasper, sleeping peacefully in their mother's arms, and felt his heart break open in the most beautiful way possible. "Maybe we're not strangers," he said quietly. "Maybe we're just people who found each other exactly when we needed to." Outside the hospital windows, the storm was finally beginning to clear, and the first hints of dawn were painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Inside the delivery room, 3 adults and 2 babies sat in comfortable silence, all of them somehow knowing that everything had just changed forever. "I accept," Layla said finally, her voice strong and clear. "But I want to be clear. This is a business arrangement. I'll work for what you're giving me. I won't be anyone's charity case." Victor smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said. "Welcome to the family, Layla Carter." And as Stella opened her tiny eyes and seemed to look directly at him, Victor realized that sometimes the most beautiful miracles came disguised as storms. Chapter 3. The Garden of Second Chances. 2 weeks after the twins' dramatic entrance into the world, Victor's Bentley wound its way through the tree-lined streets of Beacon Hill, carrying precious cargo. In the back seat, Layla held Stella and Jasper in matching car seats that had appeared in the hospital room the day after their birth-top-rated safety models that prioritized protection above all else. She'd protested, of course, but Victor had simply said, "The safest for the most precious," and somehow that had ended the argument. Now, as they turned through wrought iron gates that opened at the touch of a remote, Layla felt her breath catch in her throat. The estate unfolded before them like something from a storybook. 15 acres of manicured perfection nestled in the heart of one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. Ancient oak trees lined the cobblestone drive, their branches forming a cathedral of green overhead, while meticulously maintained gardens stretched as far as the eye could see. The main house was a masterpiece of federal architectural red brick and white columns, with ivy climbing its walls like nature's own decorative flourish. But it was the smaller building nestled among the rose gardens that made Layla's heart skip a beat. The cottage looked like it had been transplanted from the English countryside. Honey, colored stone walls, diamond-paned windows that caught the afternoon sunlight, and a roof of weathered slate that spoke of centuries rather than decades. "That's yours," Victor said simply, following her gaze. "The cottage has been empty for too long. It needs a family to bring it back to life." Layla shifted Stella to her other arm, trying to process the reality of what she was seeing. The cottage alone was larger than any place she'd ever lived, and it sat in gardens that belonged in magazines, surrounded by the kind of beauty that most people only dreamed of. "Victor," she said carefully, "this is too much. I can't possibly accept—" "You can, and you will," he interrupted, but gently. "Layla, I've been rattling around that big house alone for 3 years. Having you and the babies here isn't charity, it's sanity. You're giving me far more than I'm giving you." He parked the Bentley in front of the cottage, and as if summoned by magic, a woman in her 60s appeared from around the corner. She had silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the sort of competent warmth that immediately put people at ease. "Mrs. Langley," Victor said, stepping out to greet her. "Perfect timing, as always, Mr. Voss," she replied with a smile that spoke of years of mutual respect and affection. "I've been so looking forward to meeting our new residents." Layla emerged from the car more slowly, still adjusting to moving with 2 infants and a body that was healing from childbirth. "Mrs. Langley immediately stepped forward not to help with the babies. She was too wise for that presumption, but simply to offer her presence as support. "You must be Layla," she said warmly. "I'm Margaret Langley, the estate manager. I've prepared the cottage for your arrival, though I suspect you'll want to make your own adjustments once you've settled in." "Mrs. Langley has been running this place since before I bought it," Victor explained, lifting the car seats from the vehicle with practiced ease. "She knows every inch of the property better than I do. If you need anything at all, she's your first call." The cottage's front door was painted deep forest green, with a brass knocker shaped like a rose and window boxes overflowing with late-season flowers. Mrs. Langley produced an old-fashioned skeleton key from her pocket and unlocked the door with a satisfying click. The interior took Layla's breath away. The main room was spacious but cozy, with exposed wooden beams across the ceiling and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Comfortable furniture in soft blues and creams invited relaxation, while built-in bookshelves spoke of quiet evenings and good literature. Everything was perfectly clean but lived in, as if the cottage had been waiting patiently for the right family to call it home. "The kitchen is fully stocked, Mrs. Langley was saying, leading them through an archway into a room that belonged in a cooking magazine. White cabinets with glass fronts, butcher block countertops, a farmhouse sink beneath a window that looked out onto the rose garden. I took the liberty of including some basics for the babies as well: formula, diapers, that sort of thing. Just until you have a chance to get your bearings." Layla set Stella's carrier on the kitchen island and turned in a slow circle, trying to absorb the reality of her new life. "This is incredible," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Victor said with a grin that transformed his usually serious face into something boyish and beautiful. "Wait until you see the rest." The cottage had 3 bedrooms upstairs, a master suite with its own bathroom and a view of the gardens, and 2 smaller rooms that Mrs. Langley had already begun converting into nurseries. The walls were painted in soft yellows and greens, perfect for babies of any gender, and new cribs sat waiting in each room. "I thought the twins might like their own spaces as they grow," Mrs. Langley explained. "But for now, they can both stay in your room if you prefer." Layla found herself blinking back tears as she looked at the cribs, at the rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light, at the changing table stocked with everything 2 babies could possibly need. It was more than she'd ever dared to dream for her children, more than she'd ever had herself. "Why?" she asked Victor, who was leaning in the doorway, watching her reaction. "Why are you doing all this?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Do you believe in fate, Layla?" She considered the question seriously. "I believe in hard work and making your own luck, but lately—" She looked down at Stella, who was awake and staring at the sunlight streaming through the window. "Lately, I'm starting to think maybe there's something more. 2 weeks ago, I got the worst news of my life, Victor said quietly. I learned that I might never be able to have children of my own. I drove through a storm, thinking my life was over. And then I found you two perfect babies coming into the world, a mother who would do anything for them. And somehow I got to be part of that miracle. He stepped into the room, approaching slowly, as if afraid to intrude. Maybe we were meant to find each other. Maybe this is exactly where we're all supposed to be. Before Layla could respond, Jasper began to fuss in his carrier downstairs. The sound seemed to break the spell of the moment, bringing them back to the practical realities of caring for newborns. I should feed them, Layla said, suddenly shy in the face of Victor's intensity. Of course. Mrs. Langley stocked the kitchen with everything you should need. I'll let you get settled. But as he moved toward the door, Layla found herself calling after him. Victor, would you like to stay for dinner? I mean, I could cook something as a way of saying thank you. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. I'd love that, but only if you let me help. I may be useless with babies, but I make a mean pasta primavera. And so, as the afternoon melted into evening, they found themselves in the cottage kitchen together, Victor chopping vegetables with the precision of someone who'd learned to cook for himself, while Layla moved between feeding the twins and seasoning the sauce. It was domestic and comfortable in a way that neither of them had expected, as if they were pieces of the same puzzle finally clicking into place. Mrs. Langley had discreetly disappeared after ensuring they had everything they needed, leaving them to discover the rhythm of their new arrangement. Stella and Jasper seemed to approve of their surroundings, sleeping peacefully in their carriers while their mother and the man who'd saved them all learned to navigate the strange intimacy of sharing space and creating a meal together. Tell me about your family, Victor said as they sat down to eat at the small dining table overlooking the garden. Layla was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta around her fork. There isn't much to tell. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She was Persian, full of stories and poetry and wisdom about making the best of whatever life handed you. She taught me that love isn't about what you have to give. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. She sounds remarkable. She was. She died when I was in nursing school, left me her jewelry and her books of poetry and the absolute certainty that I could handle whatever came next. Layla smiled softly. I think she would have loved this place. She always said that gardens were where God practiced making beautiful things. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds, the soft breathing of sleeping babies, and the distant murmur of evening settling over the gardens. As darkness fell, lights came on automatically throughout the grounds, transforming the view outside into something magical. What about you? Layla asked eventually. Your family? Victor's expression grew shadowed. My mother died when I was 12 cancer. My father never really recovered. He threw himself into work and left me to raise myself mostly. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited everything, including a marriage to a woman who wanted the lifestyle more than the man. Isabella, Layla said, remembering the name from their conversation at the hospital. Isabella, he confirmed. We married because it made sense on paper. Two attractive people from good families, combining resources and social connections. I thought I could learn to love her, or at least build something real with her. But she's cold, beautiful, and perfect and utterly cold. I'm sorry, Layla said, and meant it. That must be lonely. Victor looked at her across the small table, candlelight flickering between them, two babies sleeping peacefully nearby, and felt something shift in his chest. It was, he said quietly, until now. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Layla felt her cheeks warm, felt the dangerous flutter of attraction that she'd been trying to ignore since that first night in the storm. Victor, she said carefully, I need you to know that I can't be someone's consolation prize. I won't be the rebound from a bad marriage or the charity case who's grateful enough to offer whatever you want in return for this kindness. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense and sincere. I would never ask that of you. What I'm offering is exactly what I said. A job, a home, a chance for your children to grow up somewhere safe and beautiful. Nothing more, nothing less. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What happens beyond that is up to us to decide, if and when we're both ready. Layla studied his face in the candlelight, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all she saw was honesty, and something that might have been hope. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll see what happens." As if in agreement, Stella chose that moment to wake up and announce her need for attention with a healthy cry. The spell of the evening was broken, but not destroyed, simply transformed into something more real, more sustainable. Victor helped clear the dishes while Layla tended to the babies, and when it was time for him to return to the main house, he kissed her forehead gently, like a benediction. "Welcome home, Layla," he whispered, and for the first time in her adult life, she actually felt like she was. Chapter 4. Dancing in Starlight. 8 months had passed since Layla and the twins had made the cottage their home, and autumn was painting the estate in shades of gold and crimson that took her breath away. Every morning, Stella and Jasper had grown from tiny bundles into actual little people. Stella, with her contemplative amber eyes and delicate features. Jasper, with his determined jaw and sturdy limbs that promised he'd be tall like his mother. They were crawling everywhere now and pulling themselves up on furniture, with Jasper taking his first tentative steps just last week. Their development had given Layla something she hadn't had since their birth. Time to think, to breathe, to remember she was more than just mama. The work arrangement had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Layla managed Victor's correspondence, coordinated with the gardening staff, and handled the endless details that came with maintaining a property like theirs. It was work that challenged her mind without overwhelming her schedule, allowing her to be present for her children while contributing meaningfully to the household. But it was the unplanned moments that had become the most precious part of her days, like discovering that Victor played piano. She'd first heard the music on a sleepless night in late October, when Jasper was teething and refusing to settle. The sound had drifted across the gardens from the main house, something classical and heartbreakingly beautiful that seemed to capture all the longing and sorrow she'd glimpsed in Victor's gray eyes. Night after night, she'd found herself standing at her bedroom window, Stella or Jasper in her arms, listening to him pour his soul into the keys. Tonight was different. Tonight, both babies were sleeping peacefully, and Layla found herself drawn not just to her window, but across the moonlit gardens toward the source of the music. The main house was mostly dark, except for the music room on the first floor, where soft light spilled through tall windows onto the terrace. Layla approached quietly, not wanting to intrude, but unable to resist the pull of the melody. Through the glass, she could see Victor at a grand piano that looked like it belonged in a concert hall, his profile illuminated by the warm glow of a single lamp. He was playing Chopin. She recognized the piece from her grandmother's old records, but there was something raw and personal in his interpretation that made it sound like he was composing it as he went along. His eyes were closed, his dark hair falling across his forehead, and there was a vulnerability in his posture that she'd never seen during their daytime interactions. This was Victor without his armor, without the careful control he maintained in his business dealings and social obligations. This was the man who'd carried her through a storm, who'd given her children a fairy tale home, who'd somehow become essential to her daily happiness, without either of them acknowledging what was happening between them. As the final notes faded into silence, Layla found herself knocking softly on the French doors that led from the terrace into the music room. Victor looked up, startled, and for a moment, she saw him completely unguarded, surprised, pleased, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. He was wearing dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that clung to his shoulders in ways that reminded her he was more than just her employer, more than just the kind man who'd saved her and her children. "Layla," he said, rising from the piano bench and crossing to unlock the doors. "Is everything all right? The babies?" "They're sleeping," she assured him. Suddenly aware that she was standing in his garden at nearly midnight, wearing nothing but pajama pants and a silk camisole, her hair loose around her shoulders, she'd grabbed a cardigan on her way out, but the October air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. "I heard you playing, and I couldn't resist listening. I hope that's okay." "More than okay," he said, stepping aside to let her enter the music room. "I had no idea anyone could hear me from the cottage." "Sound carries beautifully across the gardens," she said, looking around the room with wonder. The space was masculine but elegant, with built-in bookshelves, leather furniture, and that magnificent Steinway piano dominating the center. This room is incredible. Do you play often? When I can't sleep, he admitted, closing the doors behind her, which is most nights lately. I'm sorry if I've been keeping you awake. Don't apologize, Layla said quickly. It's beautiful. Sad sometimes, but beautiful. You play like someone who's trying to work something out. Victor was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the lamplight. What am I trying to work out? The question was soft, intimate. And Layla felt the shift in the air between them. The acknowledgement of something they'd been carefully dancing around for months. I think, she said carefully, you're trying to figure out how to be happy. And what's your diagnosis, doctor? Carter? She smiled at the gentle teasing in his voice. Play something hopeful, she said, echoing words from a dream she'd had but never spoken aloud. Play something that sounds like tomorrow instead of yesterday. Victor returned to the piano bench, but instead of playing, he patted the space beside him. Sit with me, he said. I'll play better with company. Layla hesitated for only a moment before crossing the room and settling beside him on the bench. The space was intimate, their thighs brushing, his warmth radiating through the cashmere of his sweater. She could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that spoke of cedar and Raynand, feel the careful control in the way he held himself so close to her. What would you like to hear? He asked, his fingers poised over the keys. Something that makes you smile, she said. Something that reminds you why beautiful things exist. Victor began to play, and this time the music was different, lighter, more playful, with threads of joy woven through the melody. She recognized it as Debussy, something impressionistic and dreamy that painted pictures of sunlight on water and children laughing in gardens. Better? He asked without stopping, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Much better. She confirmed. You have incredible hands. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. But Victor just smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something devastatingly handsome. They're good for a few things, he said, transitioning into something she didn't recognize, a melody that seemed to be flowing directly from his imagination onto the keys. This is something I've been working on. I don't think it has a name yet. The music was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and hope and something that sounded suspiciously like love. As he played, Layla found herself watching his profile, the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, the small frown of concentration between his eyebrows, to the way his lips curved slightly when he hit a particularly satisfying chord progression. It's about you, he said quietly, still playing. All of it. The hope, the beauty, the way you've brought light into this house, into my life. Layla's breath caught. Victor. I know, he said, the music growing softer, more intimate. I know we said we'd see what happens, that we wouldn't rush anything, but 8 months of watching you be an incredible mother, 8 months of your laughter in my gardens, 8 months of wanting to tell you how beautiful you are, and not knowing if I have the right. The music stopped abruptly. I'm falling in love with you, Layla. I've been falling in love with you since that night in the storm, and I don't know how to pretend otherwise anymore. The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Layla could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of his confession settling between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I'm scared, she whispered. Of me? Of this? Of wanting something I might not get to keep? Of my children getting attached to you? She couldn't finish the sentence. Victor turned on the bench to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and sincere. Layla, I need you to understand something. This isn't a whim for me, or a rebellion against my marriage, or some kind of midlife crisis. You and Stella and Jasper, you're not just living in my house, you're living in my heart. I wake up every morning grateful that you're here, and I go to sleep every night terrified that someday you might decide to leave. What about Isabella? What about her? His voice was flat, emotionless. We've been living separate lives for over a year. She has her charity boards and her social events and her other interests. I have my work and my music. And for the past 8 months, the most beautiful family I could never have imagined finding. Layla studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or uncertainty. But all she saw was honesty and love, and a vulnerability that made her chest ache. If I do this, she said slowly, if I let myself love you back, And I'm not saying I haven't already started too. I need you to understand what you're signing up for. I'm a package deal. My children will always come first. Always. And if you ever hurt them or abandon them the way their father did, I would never, Victor said fiercely. Layla, I love those babies like they're my own. Stella, with her serious little face and the way she studies everything like she's taking notes for later. Jasper, with his determination to crawl faster than any baby in the history of the world. They're not obstacles to loving you. They're part of why I love you. You're an incredible mother, and watching you with them makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves to be part of that. Tears pricked at Layla's eyes. You already are that man, she whispered. You've been that man since the night you carried me through the rain. Then dance with me, he said, standing and extending his hand to her. Dance with me like we should have done months ago. There was no music now, except the soft sound of their breathing and the distant whisper of wind in the trees outside. But as Layla placed her hand in his and let him pull her into his arms, she could hear something better than any melody, the sound of her own heart, finally deciding to trust again. They moved together slowly, swaying in the lamplight, her head finding its natural place against his shoulder, his hand warm and sure on her lower back. Through the tall windows, stars wheeled overhead like witnesses to their beginning, and the garden stretched out around them like a promise of all the beautiful tomorrows they might build together. I love you too, Layla whispered against his neck, feeling him go still in her arms. I've been trying not to, but I love you, too. Victor pulled back to look at her, his face radiant with joy and relief, and something that looked suspiciously like tears. Say it again, he requested, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Victor Voss, she said clearly, standing on her toes to press her forehead against his. I love your music and your kindness and the way you read bedtime stories to babies who aren't even yours. I love that you carried me through a storm and then gave me a home in your heart. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 8 months of restrained longing, finally given permission to breathe. She tasted like hope and felt like coming home. And when they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. So, what happens now? Layla asked, her hand still fisted in his sweater. Now, Victor said, brushing a curl away from her face, we figure out how to build a life together. You and me and 2 babies who deserve all the love in the world. And Isabella? I'll handle Isabella, he said, his voice growing hard for just a moment before softening again as he looked at her. She stopped being my problem the moment I realized you were my solution. Outside, somewhere in the mansion that had been too empty for too long, a clock chimed midnight. A new day was beginning, and with it, the first chapter of a love story that had been 8 months in the making. But neither Victor nor Layla knew that in her tower bedroom, overlooking the gardens, Isabella stood at her window, watching them dance, her beautiful face twisted with rage and the kind of cold calculation that had always been her trademark. The charity boards and social events were about to become the least of her concerns. The game, as far as Isabella was concerned, was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Language of Flowers. November arrived at the estate like a whispered secret, painting the gardens in shades of amber and copper, while wrapping the morning air in that particular coolness that spoke of winter's approach. For Layla, it had become the most beautiful month of her life. 4 weeks since that midnight dance in the music room had changed everything between her and Victor. 4 weeks of discovering what it meant to be loved by a man who treated her heart like the precious thing it was. Their courtship unfolded with the deliberate grace of a classical symphony, each movement building on the last. Victor seemed to understand instinctively that Layla needed to be wooed slowly, carefully, with the kind of patient devotion that would heal the wounds Tristan had left on her ability to trust. So he courted her with flowers. It started the morning after their first kiss, when Layla found a single white rose on her doorstep with a note written in Victor's elegant handwriting, for new beginnings and the courage to believe in them. The next day brought purple lavender for devotion that grows stronger with time, then yellow tulips for the sunshine of her smile and the way it brightens every room she enters. Each flower came with its own message, and Layla found herself researching florography, learning that Victor was composing love letters in petals and stems, pink peonies for honor and wealth of spirit, white jasmine for sweet love and amiability, red camellias for the flame that burned in his heart for her. She began responding in kind, leaving him coffee and handwritten notes with lines of Persian poetry her grandmother had taught her. Verses that spoke of love as patient as mountains and fierce as desert storms. Sometimes she would translate the Farsi for him, watching his face transform as he understood the depth of emotion in words that had been passed down through generations of women who knew what it meant to love completely. "Golab man, rose of my heart," she wrote one morning. "My grandmother used to say that love is not about finding someone to live with, but finding someone you cannot live without. I think I'm beginning to understand what she meant." The domesticity of their days took on a sweetness that neither of them had expected. Victor began spending his mornings in the cottage before heading to his office in downtown Boston, ostensibly to check on estate matters, but really to steal moments with Layla and the twins. He would arrive just as she was getting the babies fed and dressed, and somehow those chaotic 20 minutes of preparing for the day became the most peaceful part of his routine. Stella had taken to him immediately, her serious amber eyes following his movements with the kind of focus that suggested she was cataloging everything about him for future reference. She would reach for him with chubby fists when he came near. And the first time she'd grabbed his finger and held on, Victor had gone absolutely still with wonder. "She knows you're important," Layla had said, watching the baby study Victor's face with intense concentration. Babies can sense these things. Jasper was more reserved, watching Victor with the cautious assessment of someone who'd learned early that not all adults could be trusted. But gradually, the little boy began to warm to this man who spoke to him like he was a person rather than an object, who got down on the floor to play rather than expecting to be entertained from a distance. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Jasper was fussing over a particularly difficult teething episode. Nothing Layla tried would console him, not feeding, not rocking, not the usual arsenal of maternal comfort. Victor, who had been quietly reading estate correspondence at the kitchen table, suddenly began to hum. It was the melody he'd been composing, the one he'd told Layla was about her and her children. The wordless tune was soothing and familiar, and within minutes, Jasper had stopped crying and was staring at Victor with something that looked suspiciously like recognition. "He remembers," Layla had whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "You must have hummed that while I was pregnant. That first night in the hospital. He remembers your voice." From that moment on, Jasper was as devoted to Victor as his sister, and Layla often found all three of them on the cottage floor in the morning's two babies, crawling over a man in a $1,000 suit who didn't seem to care that they were drooling on his Italian silk ties. But it was the evenings that had become truly magical. After dinner, when the twins were settled for the night, Layla and Victor had fallen into the habit of walking through the gardens together. The estate was beautiful in daylight, but at night it became something transcendent. Pathways lit by subtle solar lights, fountains creating music in the darkness, the scent of late-blooming roses carried on the cool air. They talked about everything during those walks. Victor shared stories of his lonely childhood, his complicated relationship with success, his dreams of creating something meaningful with his life, beyond just accumulating wealth. Layla spoke of her grandmother's wisdom, her years as a nurse, her fears and hopes for Stella and Jasper's futures. "Tell me about Tristan," Victor said one evening as they sat on a bench beside the fountain, watching moonlight dance on the water. Layla was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to share. "He was charming," she said finally. "The kind of charming that feels dangerous and exciting when you're young and haven't learned to recognize the warning signs. He was a few years older, worked in finance, always had money for expensive dinners and weekend trips. I thought I was sophisticated for dating someone like him. What changed? I grew up," she said simply, "and I got pregnant. The moment I told him about the twins, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't his exciting girlfriend anymore. I was a problem to be solved. He offered to pay for an abortion, and when I refused, he got angry. Said I was trying to trap him, that he wasn't ready to be tied down by complications." Victor's jaw tightened. "He called your children complications." "His children," Layla corrected. "Biologically, anyway. But yes, that's exactly what he called them. Two perfect little souls, and he saw them as nothing but obstacles to his freedom." She turned to look at Victor in the moonlight. "That's when I knew I couldn't make it work with him, no matter how much I'd thought I loved him. Anyone who could look at new life as a burden instead of a blessing wasn't someone I wanted in my children's lives." "He's a fool," Victor said fiercely. A complete and utter fool. His loss, Layla agreed, echoing the words she'd spoken in the hospital the night the twins were born. But I'm grateful, in a way. If he'd stayed, if he'd been the kind of man who could love them properly, I never would have met you. Victor reached for her hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Do you really believe that? That we were meant to find each other? I believe in a lot of things I didn't believe in a year ago, Layla said, leaning against his shoulder. I believe that sometimes terrible things happen to put you exactly where you need to be for something beautiful to begin. I believe that love isn't always planned or convenient or sensible, but that doesn't make it any less real. And I believe that some souls recognize each other the moment they meet, even if it takes the minds a little longer to catch up. My soul knew you, Victor said quietly. That night in the storm, when I saw you fighting to bring your babies into the world, something in me just recognized something in you, like I'd been waiting my whole life for that moment without knowing it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fountain and the distant sound of nightbirds settling in the trees. The main house glowed softly in the distance, most of its windows dark except for the light in Isabella's suite. Layla tried not to think about Victor's wife, about the confrontation that was surely coming, about how precarious her happiness really was. What are you thinking about? Victor asked, following her gaze toward the house. Reality, Layla admitted. This feels like a dream sometimes, too beautiful to be real. Part of me keeps waiting for something to go wrong. What if nothing goes wrong? He asked. What if this is just the beginning of everything going right? Before she could answer, Layla's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. The message was from an unknown number, but she recognized the arrogant tone immediately. Heard you're playing house with a rich man. Hope you're enjoying it while it lasts. We need to talk. Victor noticed her sudden tension immediately. What is it? Layla showed him the message, watching his expression darken as he read. Tristan, she said unnecessarily. How did he get your number? I don't know. I changed it after I moved here. But she felt sick, the beautiful peace of the evening shattered by the reminder that their happiness existed in a bubble that others could puncture at will. Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the fountain and back. This ends now, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to solving problems decisively. I'm having my security team trace this number, and I'm getting you a new phone tomorrow with a number that only you, I, and Mrs. Langley know. Victor, you can't protect me from everything. Watch me, he said, turning to face her with eyes that blazed silver in the moonlight. Layla, you and those babies are the most important things in my world. I will absolutely protect you from everything I possibly can, and I will eliminate anything that threatens your peace or safety. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have scared her, but instead it made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. Tristan had made her feel like a burden, like someone whose problems were her own to solve. Victor made her feel like someone worth defending. I love you, she said. The words coming out more intense than she'd intended. The change in his expression was immediate and devastating. The anger melted away, replaced by something so tender it made her chest ache. He crossed back to her in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. I love you too, he said, pressing his forehead against hers. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. And I promise you, Layla, Tristan, or anyone else who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. He kissed her then, soft and fierce and full of promises, while somewhere in the darkness, a text message from another number lit up her old phone. Soon, darling? Very soon. But neither of them saw that message. And for one more perfect night, they were able to believe that love might actually be enough to keep the storms at bay. Chapter 6. When Storms Collide. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala was supposed to be Isabella's crowning social achievement of the season. Held in the ballroom of Boston's most prestigious hotel, it drew the city's elite like moths to a flame old money and new money, mingling over champagne and 7-course dinners while pretending their charitable contributions weren't primarily motivated by tax write-offs and social positioning. Layla hadn't wanted to attend. The invitation had arrived, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Victor Voss and guest. And even though Victor had made it clear that she would be his date, the whole situation felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a suit made of meat. You don't have to do this." Victor had said that morning as she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the deep sapphire silk of the dress he'd had delivered from Saks. It was beautiful, elegant, and sophisticated without being flashy, but she felt like she was putting on armor for battle. "Yes, I do," she'd replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I can't hide in the cottage forever, and if I'm going to be part of your life, I need to be part of all of it." She added with a smile that was braver than she felt, "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't spend the entire evening talking business in a corner." Stella and Jasper were staying with Mrs. Langley for the evening, an arrangement that had taken weeks to negotiate. Mrs. Langley had finally convinced Layla that the babies would be perfectly safe and that new mothers needed occasional evenings to remember they were also women. Now, standing in the hotel ballroom, surrounded by Boston's social aristocracy, Layla was beginning to think she should have listened to her instincts and stayed home. The evening had started well enough. Victor had been the perfect gentleman, introducing her to his business associates and longtime friends with genuine pride and affection. "This is Layla Carter," he would say, his hand warm and reassuring on her lower back. "She manages my estate and makes my life infinitely more beautiful." Most people had been polite, even warm. Layla's natural grace and intelligence quickly won over the few who might have been inclined to judge, and her background as a nurse gave her common ground with the doctors and hospital administrators in attendance. But she'd felt Isabella's eyes on her all evening, like a physical weight. Victor's wife was stunning in the way that money, breeding, and careful genetic selection could create a blonde and elegant in a cream-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She moved through the ballroom like a queen holding court, air-kissing her way through conversations with the practiced ease of someone who'd been groomed for this role since birth. She'd barely acknowledged Layla's presence, offering only a cool nod when Victor had made introductions early in the evening. But Layla could feel the calculation behind those ice-blue eyes, the assessment of a predator deciding how best to eliminate a threat. The attack came during the auction portion of the evening. Layla had excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the overwhelming sensory experience of too many people, too much perfume, and too many conversations happening at once. She was touching up her lipstick when Isabella swept in, her cream gown rustling like whispered threats. "Well, well," Isabella said, positioning herself at the mirror beside Layla. "If it isn't the estate manager." "Mrs. Voss," Layla replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. "Please, call me Isabella. We're practically family now, aren't we?" The words dripped with false sweetness. "I have to say, you've certainly made yourself comfortable in my husband's life and in his house." "I live in the cottage," Layla said carefully. "I work for your husband." Isabella laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, darling, let's not pretend this is about work. You're a beautiful woman with 2 bastard children and no money, and my husband has always had a savior complex. It's really quite predictable when you think about it." Heat flashed through Layla's chest, but she kept her voice level. "My children are not bastards, and what's between your husband and me is none of your concern." "Everything about my husband is my concern," Isabella said, her mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. "I am his wife. You are an employee who's forgotten her place." "Your marriage has been over for years," Layla said quietly. "Everyone knows it." "My marriage is a legal contract," Isabella replied, snapping her compact shut with unnecessary force. "One that entitles me to half of everything Victor has built. Do you really think he's going to throw away billions of dollars for a nurse with a charity case sob story?" Before Layla could respond, Isabella swept toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Enjoy tonight, dear. It may be the last time you're welcome in polite society." Layla remained in the bathroom for several more minutes, trying to calm her racing heart and restore her composure. She'd known this confrontation was coming, had been preparing for it mentally for weeks, but the reality of Isabella's venom was more unsettling than she'd expected. When she finally returned to the ballroom, the auction was in full swing. Victor was bidding on a week at a luxury resort in Tuscany, presumably for them to take together once everything with Isabella was settled. The thought should have thrilled her, but Isabella's words echoed in her mind. "Do you really think he's going to throw away billions of dollars?" She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the commotion at first. It started as murmurs, then escalated to the kind of excited whispers that rippled through high society events when scandal was in the air. People were turning toward the ballroom entrance, phones appearing despite the event's supposedly strict no-media policy. That's when she saw him. Tristan stood in the doorway of the ballroom like he owned the place, tall and handsome in a tuxedo that fit him flawlessly. Beside him was a woman Layla didn't recognize, blonde, striking, and wearing enough diamonds to finance a small country. The woman's hand was possessively placed on Tristan's arm, and she was surveying the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person wherever she went. Layla realized with a sick feeling that this must be Evelyn Holt, the attorney girlfriend who'd somehow secured them invitations to Boston's most exclusive charity event. Layla felt the blood drain from her face as Tristan's eyes found hers across the crowded room. His smile was the same charming, predatory grin that had once made her pulse race and now made her stomach turn with dread. "Layla," Victor appeared at her side, following her horrified gaze. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Tristan," she whispered. "He's here." Victor's expression went from concern to fury in less than a second. How the hell did he get in here? Before Layla could answer, Tristan was making his way through the crowd toward them, the blonde woman trailing behind him like an accessory. Conversations died in their wake as people recognized the drama unfolding before them. "Layla," Tristan said when he reached them, his voice carrying just enough warmth to sound genuine to any eavesdroppers. "You look beautiful. Motherhood agrees with you." "Tristan," her voice was steady, but Victor could feel her trembling beside him. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Tristan continued, extending his hand to Victor with practiced confidence. "Tristan Reid. I'm Stella and Jasper's father." The words hit the ballroom like a bomb. Conversation stopped entirely now, and Layla could feel hundreds of eyes on them, smartphones discreetly recording what was clearly going to be the social event of the season. Victor ignored Tristan's outstretched hand. "You signed away your parental rights," he said quietly, his voice carrying deadly calm. "You have no claim to those children." Tristan's smile widened. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate. You see, I never signed anything. I may have abandoned my responsibilities temporarily, but I never legally relinquished my parental rights." "Irregularities." Layla found her voice, though it came out higher than she intended. "Not irregularities," Evelyn Holt corrected smoothly. "Legal opportunities. Tristan may have been absent, but he never formally terminated his parental rights. That means he has every legal right to seek custody, visitation, and child support arrangements." "What do you want?" Victor asked, stepping slightly in front of Layla in a gesture that was protective and possessive at the same time. "I want to see my children," Tristan said, his voice loud enough to carry to the interested observers surrounding them. "I want to be part of their lives." "Is that so unreasonable?" "You abandoned them," Layla said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "You called them complications and walked away." "I was young and scared," Tristan replied, and if she hadn't known him so well, Layla might have believed the regret in his voice. "I've made mistakes, but I've grown up, and I want to make things right." "How touching," came Isabella's voice from behind them. She'd materialized during the confrontation like a shark scenting blood in the water. A father wanting to reconnect with his children. How could anyone oppose such a noble desire? The pieces clicked into place in Layla's mind with horrifying clarity. Tristan and Isabella were working together. Somehow they'd found each other and decided that their mutual enemy was the happiness she'd found with Victor. "This is neither the time nor the place for this conversation," Victor said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to ending discussions when he chose to. "If you have legal concerns, you can take them up with my attorneys." "Oh, but this is the perfect place," Isabella said sweetly. "After all, everyone should know what kind of woman you've been spending your time with. A woman who keeps a man's children from their father, who moves in with a married man. Who?" "That's enough," Victor said, his voice cutting through Isabella's words like a blade. "Layla, we're leaving." But as they turned to go, Tristan's voice followed them, pitched perfectly to carry throughout the now silent ballroom. "I'll see you in court, Layla. I'll see my children soon." The ride home was silent, except for the sound of Layla's quiet tears. Victor drove with controlled fury, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Layla stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. "I'm so sorry," she finally whispered as they pulled through the estate gates. I've ruined everything." Victor parked the car and turned to face her, his expression fierce with love and determination. "You haven't ruined anything," he said. "They ambushed us, but that doesn't mean they've won. Layla, look at me." She turned to meet his eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. Not anger at her, not regret for the public scene, but absolute unwavering devotion. "I meant what I said in the garden that night," he told her. "Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. Tristan, Isabella, whoever else wants to play games, they have no idea what they're up against." "What if he really can take the children?" Layla asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if Evelyn Holt is as good as she thinks she is?" "Then we'll fight him with everything we have," Victor said simply. "We'll hire the best attorneys money can buy. We'll gather evidence of his abandonment and his character, and we'll prove that those babies belong exactly where they are, with their mother, in a home where they're loved and wanted, and safe. And if we lose?" Victor cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "We won't lose," he said with quiet confidence, "because we have something they don't have." "What's that?" "The truth," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "And love. And each other. That's more than enough to win any war they want to start." He kissed her then, soft and fierce and full of promises. And for a moment, Layla let herself believe that love really could conquer all. But as they walked toward the cottage together, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Inside the cottage, Mrs. Langley was waiting with a report that both babies had been perfect angels all evening. Stella and Jasper were sleeping peacefully in their cribs, completely unaware that their world had just been threatened by forces beyond their understanding. "How was the gala?" Mrs. Langley asked, then took one look at their faces and didn't wait for an answer. "I'll put the kettle on," she said simply. Layla felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who seemed to know exactly what was needed in any situation. Over tea in the cottage kitchen, they told Mrs. Langley everything. She listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "Tristan Reed," she said when they finished. "I'll have our security team run a background check immediately. And Evelyn Holt, I know that name. She's ambitious, expensive, and she doesn't take cases. She doesn't think she can win." "That's not exactly reassuring," Layla said. "Actually, it is," Mrs. Langley replied, "because it means they think they have something solid, which means we know what we're dealing with. Better to face a known enemy than an unknown one." Victor's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened further. "What now?" Layla asked. "Nathaniel Sterling," Victor said, showing her the message. "Isabella's friend. He wants to meet for drinks tomorrow to discuss the situation. Apparently, he thinks we can work out some kind of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where I give them what they want, and everyone walks away quietly," Victor said grimly. "The kind where you and the babies disappear from my life. Isabella gets to keep playing the grieving wife. And Tristan gets to look like the reformed father, fighting for his children. And what are you going to tell him?" Victor's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm going to tell him that if he wants a war, he's picked the wrong opponent. And then I'm going to destroy him so thoroughly that he'll wish he'd never heard the name Voss." Mrs. Langley cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps," she said, "we should consider a more strategic approach. Mr. Voss, you're a businessman. You know that the best way to win a war is to never let your enemies see you coming. What do you suggest?" "We play their game," she said simply. "We let them think they're winning while we gather everything we need to destroy them properly." Tristan Reed signed away his parental rights forged documents or not. There will be records, witnesses, evidence of his character. Isabella has been living a very expensive lifestyle on your money while conducting an affair. That kind of behavior leaves trails. Evelyn Holt may be good, but she's not infallible. And ambitious attorneys sometimes cut corners when they think they're dealing with easy targets. Layla felt a flicker of hope for the first time since seeing Tristan in the ballroom. "You think we can beat them?" "I think." Mrs. Langley said with a smile that reminded Layla why this woman had been running Victor's life so efficiently for years. They have no idea what they've just started. "Mr. Voss didn't build a billion-dollar empire by backing down from fights. And I didn't spend 30 years in corporate politics without learning how to destroy people who threaten what I protect." As if summoned by their conversation, Layla's phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at Victor, who nodded grimly. "Answer it," he said. "Let's see what they want." Layla accepted the call and put it on speaker. Tristan's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and confident. "Layla, darling, I hope you're not too upset about tonight. I really didn't want things to get dramatic. But sometimes the truth has a way of coming out in public." "What do you want, Tristan?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I want to see my children," he said. "I want to be part of their lives. Surely you can understand that." "What I understand," Layla replied, "is that you abandoned us when I was pregnant and signed away your rights for money. What I understand is that you're only back because you think there's something in it for you." Tristan laughed, and the sound made her skin crawl. "Oh, Layla, always so suspicious. Maybe I'm back because I've realized what a mistake I made. Maybe I've grown up and want to do the right thing. And maybe you're working with Isabella Voss to destroy my relationship with Victor," Layla said, deciding to see how he'd react to the direct accusation. There was a pause, and when Tristan spoke again, his voice had lost some of its practiced charm. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm simply a father who wants to know his children." "Then you can go through the proper legal channels," Victor said, speaking for the first time. "You can file whatever motions you think you have grounds for, and we'll see you in court." "Actually," Tristan said, his voice regaining its confidence, "I was hoping we could work something out privately. I'm not unreasonable, Victor. I understand that you've become attached to Stella and Jasper. I'm not trying to take them away completely." "How generous of you," Victor said dryly. "I'm prepared to be very reasonable about custody arrangements," Tristan continued. "Weekends, holidays, that sort of thing. And of course, I'd expect Layla to be reasonable about child support, retroactive child support, given that I've missed the first 8 months of their lives." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about fatherhood at all. It was about money. Tristan wanted to establish paternity so he could demand financial support, probably with the goal of bleeding Victor's resources, while Isabella positioned herself for a favorable divorce settlement. "Then we go to court," Layla said simply, "and I fight for full custody. I have an excellent attorney, and I think a judge might be very interested to hear about the living arrangements you've created for my children, an unmarried woman living with a married man, accepting expensive gifts, allowing her children to be cared for by household staff while she plays dress-up at charity galas." "You're threatening us," Victor said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm offering you a choice," Tristan corrected. "Cooperation or litigation. Your decision." The line went dead, leaving them staring at the phone in stunned silence. "Well, Mrs. Langley said finally, "at least now we know exactly what we're dealing with." "Extortion," Victor said flatly. "They want money, and they're using the children as leverage." "Can they win?" Layla asked, voicing the question that terrified her most. "Mrs. Langley was quiet for a long moment, considering, with a good attorney and the right judge, possibly. "The optics aren't ideal. You are living with a married man, accepting support that could be characterized as payment for services, and Tristan does have biological rights that could be difficult to challenge." Layla felt her world tilting on its axis. "So we give them what they want?" "Absolutely not," Victor said fiercely. "We fight. We gather evidence. We expose their real motives, and we protect our family." "Our family," Layla repeated, her heart catching on the words. "Our family," Victor confirmed, reaching for her hand. "You, me, Stella, and Jasper. That's what this is, Layla. That's what we're fighting for." As if in response to their father's declaration, Jasper's cry echoed from upstairs, not distressed, just awake and wanting attention. Layla smiled, despite everything, the sound of her son's voice reminding her what really mattered. "I should go to him," she said, standing. "We should go to him," Victor corrected. And together, they climbed the stairs to tend to their children, leaving Mrs. Langley to begin planning a war that would determine the fate of their unconventional but perfect family. Outside in the gardens, autumn wind rustled through the trees like whispered warnings. And in the main house, Isabella stood at her window, watching the cottage lights, already planning her next move in a game she was absolutely determined to win. Chapter 7. Love, Letters, and Legal Wars. December arrived with the kind of bitter cold that turned Boston into a crystalline wonderland, each morning revealing gardens transformed by frost into something that belonged in fairy tales. But inside the cottage, warmth radiated from more than just the crackling fireplace. It came from the love letters that had become Victor and Layla's lifeline during the 3 weeks since the charity gala had exploded their private world into public scandal. The legal battle had begun in earnest the Monday after Tristan's threatening phone call. His attorney girlfriend had filed motions for paternity testing, custody evaluation, and emergency visitation rights. Each document crafted with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to weaponize the legal system. Victor's attorneys, the best that money could buy, were fighting back with equal vigor, but the process was slow, expensive, and emotionally devastating. Meanwhile, the media had caught scent of the story. Billionaire's secret family screamed the tabloid headlines. Love child scandal rocks, Boston society. Photographers had started appearing at the estate gates, long lenses trained on the cottage windows, hoping to catch glimpses of the woman and children at the center of the drama. It was in this atmosphere of siege and scrutiny that Victor and Layla had rediscovered the power of written words. The first letter had appeared on Layla's pillow 3 days after the gala, written in Victor's distinctive handwriting on paper that smelled faintly of his cologne. My dearest Layla, I know these past few days have been overwhelming, and I know you're questioning whether our love is worth the price everyone seems determined to make us pay. I'm writing this because I need you to understand something with absolute clarity. You are not a burden to be borne or a problem to be solved. You are the answer to questions I didn't even know I was asking. Before you, I was a man who measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. Then you stumbled into my life in the middle of a storm, bringing with you 2 perfect children and a strength that humbles me daily. And suddenly, I understood what I'd been building my empire for, not for me, but for us. For the family I never dared to dream I could have. Let them say what they will about us. Let them question our motives and judge our choices. They don't understand that some loves are worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. You are worth it, Layla. Stella and Jasper are worth it. What we're building together is worth it. Forever yours, Victor. Layla had cried over that letter, then sat down immediately to write her response. My beloved Victor, my grandmother used to tell me that love letters were prayers written in ink, conversations between souls that transcended the limitations of spoken words. I never understood what she meant until now, until I found myself pouring my heart onto paper because talking feels too small for everything I need to tell you. You say I brought strength into your life, but you have it backwards. You saved Minot just that night in the storm, but every day since. You saved me from a life of struggling to survive instead of living. You saved my children from uncertainty and fear. You saved all of us from a world that would have been colder, harder, lonelier without your love. Tristan can question my motives. Isabella can spread her poison. The media can write their stories, but they will never understand the truth. I didn't fall in love with your money or your mansion or your social position. I fell in love with the man who hummed lullabies to babies who weren't his, who learned the language of flowers to court me properly, who plays piano in the middle of the night because his heart is too full to sleep. With all my love, Layla. And so it continued, letter after letter, even though they saw each other every day. Somehow, the written words allowed them to express depths of feeling that face-to-face conversations couldn't contain. Victor wrote about his childhood loneliness, his fear that he wasn't good enough to be a father to Stella and Jasper, his determination to create the kind of family he'd always dreamed of. Layla shared her grandmother's stories, her fears about the legal battles, her growing certainty that their love was strong enough to survive whatever tests the world threw at them. The letters became their sanctuary during the daily chaos of depositions, court filings, and strategy sessions with attorneys. While lawyers argued technicalities and private investigators dug up dirt on Tristan's character, Victor and Layla were falling deeper in love through words that painted pictures of their hopes and dreams. Mrs. Langley had become their unofficial general in the war against Tristan and Isabella. Her research had uncovered a treasure trove of damaging information. Tristan's history of financial irresponsibility, his pattern of abandoning relationships when they became inconvenient, his attorney girlfriend's previous disbarment proceedings in another state for ethics violations. Isabella's affairs were well documented, as was her expensive lifestyle. funded entirely by Victor's money while contributing nothing to their marriage. "We're building a case," Mrs. Langley had explained during one of their evening strategy sessions. "But we need to be patient. Tristan and his girlfriend are expecting us to react emotionally, to make mistakes they can exploit. Instead, we're going to be methodical, thorough, and absolutely devastating when the time comes." The twins, now 9 months old, seemed blissfully unaware of the adult drama swirling around them. Stella had become mobile, crawling everywhere with determined curiosity, while Jasper was pulling himself up on furniture and taking tentative first steps. They brought lightness to even the darkest moments, their giggles and babbling, creating pockets of pure joy that reminded everyone what they were really fighting for. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the cottage windows, Victor found a letter from Layla that made him stop breathing. "My darling Victor, tonight, I watched you teaching Jasper to clap his hands while Stella tried to help by grabbing your tie, and I realized something that terrifies and thrills me in equal measure. I want to marry you not because of the legal protection it would offer, not because it would make the custody battle easier, but because I want to stand before God and our family and promise to love you for the rest of my life. I want to wear your ring and take your name and build a future where Stella and Jasper grow up, knowing they were wanted and cherished from their very first breath. I want more children with you someday, if we're blessed with that gift. I want to grow old in your gardens, surrounded by grandchildren who will never doubt they belong to a family built on love rather than obligation. I know the timing is terrible with everything that's happening. I know people will say we're rushing, that we're making decisions based on legal strategy rather than love. But my heart doesn't care about timing or public opinion. My heart knows what it wants, and it wants you, forever and always. Tell me I'm not crazy for dreaming of white dresses and wedding rings while lawyers are trying to take my children away. Tell me you dream of it, too. Yours completely, Layla." Victor read the letter 3 times, then walked to the piano, where he composed a melody that sounded like wedding bells and promises and all the hope in his heart. When he finished playing, he sat down to write the most important letter of his life. "My beloved future wife, you're not crazy. I've been carrying my grandmother's engagement ring in my pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to ask you the question that's been burning in my chest since the night we first danced. I want to marry you, Layla Carter. I want to adopt Stella and Jasper legally and give them the security of knowing they belong to us forever. I want to build the kind of love story that our children will tell their children. The ring was my grandmother's, simple solitaire diamond, surrounded by smaller stones that catch the light like stars. She would have loved you, would have understood that some women are worth waiting a lifetime to find. Tomorrow night, after the babies are asleep, meet me in the music room. I have a question to ask you properly. Until forever begins, Victor." The next evening, Layla stood in the doorway of the music room, wearing the sapphire dress from the gala, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Victor was at the piano, playing the melody he'd composed after reading her letter, their melody, the one that told the story of how 2 broken souls had found their missing pieces in each other. When the music stopped, he turned to find her watching him with tears of joy streaming down her face. Without words, he dropped to one knee beside the piano bench, producing a ring that caught the lamplight like captured starlight. "Layla Carter," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Stella and Jasper for the rest of my life? Will you build a family with me that's strong enough to weather any storm?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes," as he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. Outside, snow continued to fall on the gardens where they'd first learned to love each other, while inside the cottage, 2 babies slept peacefully. Unaware that their world had just become infinitely more secure, the legal battles would continue. The media would have their field day, but none of that mattered now. They were engaged. They were in love. And they were ready to face whatever came next together. Chapter 8. The Art of Beautiful Revenge. January brought a cold snap that froze Boston Harbor and turned the estate's fountains into sculptures of ice. But inside the cottage, Layla's engagement ring caught firelight and threw rainbows across the walls as she fed Stella her morning bottle. 3 weeks had passed since Victor's proposal, 3 weeks of planning a quiet spring wedding while their lawyers prepared for the custody hearing that would determine their family's future. Tristan's legal assault had intensified since news of their engagement leaked to the press. His attorney girlfriend had filed motion after motion, each one designed to paint Layla as an unfit mother who'd abandoned her children's welfare in pursuit of wealth. The tabloids were having a field day with headlines like Gold Digger's Desperate Gambit and Billionaire's Baby Mama Strikes Back. But Mrs. Langley's investigation had finally borne fruit, and today they would begin their counterattack. "Are you ready for this?" Victor asked, adjusting his tie in the cottage's hallway mirror. They were heading to his lawyer's office for a final strategy session before the custody hearing scheduled for the following week. "As ready as I'll ever be," Layla replied, settling Jasper into his car seat while Mrs. Langley gathered Stella's diaper bag. The twins would spend the day with their devoted caretaker while their parents prepared for legal war. The law offices of Sterling, Grant, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Boston. Marble floors and mahogany paneling designed to intimidate opposing counsel. But today, Layla felt confident as she walked into the conference room, where their legal team had assembled evidence that would destroy Tristan's case and reputation simultaneously. Edward Sterling, Victor's lead attorney, was a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd built his career on defending wealthy clients from exactly the kind of opportunistic attacks Tristan was mounting. Spread across the conference table were stacks of documents, photographs, and digital files that told the story of Tristan's true character. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms, "we have enough evidence to not only defeat Tristan Reed's custody claim, but to ensure he never bothers this family again." The evidence was devastating. Tristan's financial records showed a pattern of irresponsibility spanning years: defaulted loans, unpaid child support from a previous relationship, credit cards maxed out on gambling and luxury purchases he couldn't afford. His employment history revealed a man who'd been fired from 3 jobs for ethics violations, including one incident where he'd embezzled client funds to cover his debts, but it was the personal evidence that would destroy him completely. Private investigators had uncovered Tristan's history of domestic violence, including a restraining order filed by an ex-girlfriend in Chicago and police reports documenting his explosive temper. Most damning of all, they had security footage from the clinic where Layla had worked, showing Tristan threatening her when she told him about the pregnancy. He said, and I quote, Sterling read from the transcript, "Get rid of them, or I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." This was recorded on the clinic security system and clearly shows his attitude toward the children he's now claiming to love. Layla felt a chill remembering that night. She'd been 6 months pregnant, exhausted from a double shift, and Tristan had cornered her in the parking lot with demands that she terminate the pregnancy or give the babies up for adoption. His rage, when she'd refused, had been terrifying, and she'd known in that moment that whatever she'd thought she felt for him was completely dead. "What about his lawyer girlfriend?" Victor asked. Sterling smiled grimly. "Evelyn Holt is facing disbarment proceedings in Illinois for client fund violations. She fled to Massachusetts hoping to rebuild her practice, but she's been operating here without proper licensing. Every motion she's filed on Tristan's behalf is legally invalid, and she could face criminal charges for practicing law without a license." "So, we have them," Layla said, hardly daring to believe it. "Completely," Sterling confirmed. "But we're not just going to defeat them. We're going to ensure they can never threaten your family again. Tristan will face criminal charges for the forged documents he used to challenge the adoption papers. Evelyn will be arrested for unlawful practice of law, and both of them will be liable for the legal fees you've incurred defending against their fraudulent case." Meanwhile, their investigation into Isabella had revealed equally damaging information. Her affair with Nathaniel Sterling was well documented, including photographs of them together at hotels registered under false names, and financial records showing Nathaniel had been paying for her shopping sprees and spa treatments. More importantly, they discovered that Isabella had been systematically stealing from the charitable foundations she managed, skimming donations for her personal use. Isabella has embezzled over $2 million from various charities over the past 3 years, Sterling explained. The evidence is ironclad. Bank transfers, forged signatures, falsified donation records. When this comes to light, she'll face federal charges for charity fraud. "How do we expose them without looking vindictive?" Layla asked. She wanted justice, but she didn't want to seem like she was attacking out of spite. "We don't expose them," Sterling said with a smile. We let them expose themselves. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than releasing the damaging information themselves, they would provide it anonymously to the FBI's white-collar crime division, the Massachusetts Bar Association, and several investigative journalists known for their charity fraud exposés. Tristan and Isabella would face consequences that appeared to be the natural result of their own actions rather than targeted revenge. Over the following weeks, the plan went into motion with devastating efficiency. FBI agents arrived at Isabella's office with search warrants related to charity fraud. The Massachusetts Bar Association launched an investigation into unlicensed legal practice. Local news stations ran exposés on charity embezzlement that featured Isabella's photograph prominently. Tristan was arrested at his hotel on charges related to attempted extortion and harassment. When reporters caught him in handcuffs being led from the building, his attorney girlfriend was nowhere to be found. She'd fled Boston the moment the Bar Association investigation was announced. But the most satisfying moment came when the custody hearing was called to order, and Tristan failed to appear because he was sitting in a jail cell awaiting bail on felony charges. The judge dismissed all motions related to the case and issued a restraining order preventing Tristan from contacting Layla or the twins. "Case dismissed with prejudice," the judge announced, his gavel echoing through the courtroom like a death knell for Tristan's ambitions. Given Mr. Reed's complete abandonment of these children and his current legal troubles, this court sees no grounds for granting any form of custody or visitation rights. That evening, as snow fell softly on the estate grounds, Layla and Victor sat in the cottage living room, watching Stella and Jasper play on a blanket before the fireplace. The twins were babbling to each other in their secret language, completely unaware that their futures had just been secured forever. "It's over," Layla said, still hardly believing it. "Really over." "Not over," Victor corrected, pulling her closer on the sofa. "Just beginning." Tristan and Isabella were obstacles to our happiness, but they were never the main story. The main story is us, you and me and these perfect babies, building a life together. What happens to Isabella now? Federal prison, most likely. Nathaniel Sterling has already filed for divorce and is claiming he had no knowledge of her criminal activities. She'll face this alone, just like she wanted everyone else to face their problems. Layla felt a moment of pity for the woman who'd tried so hard to destroy their happiness, but it passed quickly. Isabella had made her choices, and now she would live with the consequences. "The wedding," Layla said suddenly. "We can actually plan our wedding without looking over our shoulders." Victor's smile was radiant. "June, in the rose garden, just like we talked about. Stella in a flower girl dress, Jasper as ring bearer, and you in white, walking toward me through flowers that smell like heaven. And after the wedding," Layla continued, "you formally adopt Stella and Jasper, giving them your name and all the legal protection that comes with it. We honeymoon in Tuscany, while Mrs. Langley spoils the children rotten. We come home and start working on giving them siblings." Stella chose that moment to pull herself up on the coffee table and take 3 wobbly steps toward her mother, her face bright with pride at her accomplishment. Jasper immediately began crawling after her, determined not to be left behind. "Look at them," Layla whispered, watching her children with tears of joy in her eyes. "They're perfect. They're safe. They're ours. Forever ours," Victor agreed, standing to scoop up both babies before they could tumble into anything dangerous. "And soon they'll have my name and my legal protection and all the brothers and sisters we can give them." As if they understood the conversation, both twins began giggling, their laughter filling the cottage with the sound of pure joy. Outside, the world continued to turn. Newspapers would print their stories of scandal and redemption, and somewhere, Tristan sat in a jail cell contemplating the spectacular failure of his schemes. But inside the cottage, a family celebrated victory not through the destruction of their enemies, but through the simple, profound happiness of love that had survived every test and emerged stronger than ever. Their revenge was complete not because they had destroyed anyone, but because they had built something beautiful that no one could ever take away. Chapter 9. Diamonds in the Rain. April rain drummed against the cottage windows with the same rhythm that had brought Victor and Layla together exactly 1 year ago. But this time, the storm carried only promises instead of uncertainty. Tomorrow would mark the anniversary of that fateful night when a broken billionaire had found a woman in labor outside a clinic and changed both their lives forever. Layla stood at her bedroom window, watching the downpour transform the estate gardens into an impressionist painting of silver and green, her grandmother's engagement ring catching lamplight on her finger. In 12 hours, she would marry the man who'd saved her from the storm and given her children a father who loved them as if they'd been born from his own heart. Stella and Jasper, now 13 months old and walking with the determined confidence of toddlers who owned the world, were napping peacefully in their rooms. Stella had developed into a thoughtful child who studied everything with serious amber eyes, while Jasper had emerged as a fearless explorer who treated every day as a new adventure. Both children had been calling Victor Dada for months, and tomorrow that title would become legally true through adoption papers that would be signed alongside their wedding certificate. The custody battle had ended 4 months ago with Tristan's arrest and Isabella's federal indictment for charity fraud. The media circus had eventually moved on to fresher scandals, leaving Victor and Layla free to plan their wedding in peace. They'd chosen a simple ceremony in the rose garden where they'd first danced, with only their closest friends and Mrs. Langley as witnesses. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Langley with last-minute wedding details. Instead, Victor appeared in the doorway, carrying a single white rose and wearing an expression of nervous excitement that made her heart flutter. "Hello, beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the same wonder it had held that first night when he'd found her in the rain. "You're not supposed to see me today," Layla protested, though she made no move to hide from him. "Bad luck. After everything we've survived, I don't think anything could bring us bad luck," Victor replied, crossing to where she stood by the window. "Besides, I have something for you, and it couldn't wait until tomorrow." "Another gift?" "Victor, you've already given me everything." "Not everything," he said, producing an envelope from his jacket pocket. "One more thing, the most important thing." Layla opened the envelope to find airline tickets, not the first-class accommodations she'd expected for their honeymoon, but something that made her gasp with surprise. "Tehran," she whispered, reading the destination. "Your grandmother's homeland," Victor explained. "I know she died before you could take the trip you'd always planned together. I hoped maybe we could go together, so you could see the places she told you about, visit the gardens she described in her poetry." Tears blurred Layla's vision as she stared at the tickets. Her grandmother had spoken endlessly of the rose gardens of Kazvin, the ancient bridges of her childhood, the mountains that surrounded the city where she'd been born. Layla had always dreamed of seeing those places, but never had the money or opportunity to travel so far. "Victor," she whispered, "I've arranged for a translator and a guide who specializes in genealogy research," he continued. "We'll spend 2 weeks tracing your grandmother's family history, visiting the places that shaped her stories, bringing some of her poetry back to where it was born." He paused, his gray eyes tender. Stella and Jasper should know their heritage, should understand that they come from a line of strong, beautiful women who survived everything the world threw at them. "How did you?" she began, then stopped as the magnitude of his gesture hit her. This wasn't just a honeymoon. It was a pilgrimage. A chance to connect with roots she'd thought were lost forever. "Mrs. Langley helped with the research," Victor admitted. "She found records of your grandmother's family, located cousins who still live in Tehran. They're excited to meet you, to hear the stories your grandmother told about her life in America." Layla set the tickets carefully on her dresser and turned to face the man who continued to surprise her with the depth of his love. "You amazing, wonderful, perfect man," she said, framing his face with her hands. "How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one," Victor said, leaning into her touch. "I was a man with everything and nothing until I found you in that storm. Now I have a family, a purpose, a reason to build something beautiful instead of just accumulating wealth." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and watching the gardens that had become the backdrop for their love story. Tomorrow, they would exchange vows under the gazebo where Victor had proposed, surrounded by the roses that had bloomed witness to their courtship. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Layla asked. "Terrified," Victor admitted with a laugh. "Not about marrying you, that's the easiest decision I've ever made. But about the adoption, about becoming Stella and Jasper's legal father. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't give them everything they deserve?" "Look at me," Layla commanded, waiting until his eyes met hers. You've been their father since the night they were born. You've changed their diapers, walked the floors with them during teething, read them bedtime stories, taught them to walk. The paperwork tomorrow just makes official what's already true in their hearts. And if they ask about Tristan someday, we'll tell them the truth that their biological father wasn't ready to be a parent, so God sent them someone who was. We'll tell them that families aren't always made by blood, but they're always made by love. Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while rain continued to fall outside their window. I love you, Layla Carter. In 12 hours, I get to call you my wife. I love you too, Victor Voss. In 12 hours, we become a family in every way that matters. A crash of thunder overhead made them both laugh, remembering another storm that had changed their lives. But this time, instead of bringing uncertainty, the rain felt like a blessing, washing the world clean for their new beginning. I should go, Victor said reluctantly. Mrs. Langley will have my head if she finds me here breaking wedding traditions. Wait, Layla said, catching his hand as he moved toward the door. I have something for you, too. She crossed to her jewelry box and retrieved a small wrapped package. Inside was a vintage pocket watch, the kind men had carried in their grandfather's time, with an inscription that made Victor's breath catch. To my beloved husband and the father of my children, time began the night you found us in the storm. L. It was my grandfather's. Layla explained. The only thing my grandmother kept from her life in Iran. She gave it to me when I graduated nursing school and told me to save it for the man who proved himself worthy of our family's legacy. Victor opened the watch, and the soft chiming of a Persian melody filled the room, the same lullaby Layla's grandmother had hummed while teaching her poetry, the same tune Layla now sang to Stella and Jasper at bedtime. She would have loved you, Layla whispered. She would have seen your heart the way I do. I'll carry it every day, Victor promised, slipping the watch into his vest pocket. And every time I check the time, I'll remember that the best part of my life began the moment I found you. Another rumble of thunder punctuated his words, and they both smiled at the storm's perfect timing. Outside, the rain continued to fall on gardens that would host their wedding tomorrow, washing away the last traces of winter and preparing the world for the spring celebration of their love. After Victor left, Layla returned to her window to watch the rain and think about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been terrified, alone, and convinced her life was over. Tomorrow, she would wake up as a bride, surrounded by love and blessed, with a future brighter than any dream she dared to dream. In their cribs, Stella and Jasper slept peacefully, unaware that tomorrow they would gain not just a legal father, but the security of knowing they belonged to a family that would never let them go. And in the main house, Mrs. Langley was putting finishing touches on wedding preparations that would transform the gardens into something magical. The storm that had brought them together was passing, leaving behind clear skies and the promise of perfect weather for the most important day of their lives. In 12 hours, Layla Carter would become Layla Voss, and 2 babies would officially become the children their hearts had always known they were meant to be. As she prepared for bed, Layla whispered a prayer of gratitude to her grandmother, to the universe, and to the mysterious forces that had brought her love in the middle of a storm. Tomorrow, under spring skies and surrounded by roses, she would marry her prince and begin the happily ever after she'd stopped believing in. Until the night a broken man had proved that sometimes fairy tales really do come true. Chapter 10. Ever After begins today. The morning of Layla's wedding dawned clear and radiant, with sunshine streaming through her bedroom windows like golden silk, and the scent of blooming roses drifting through the cottage on a gentle breeze. She woke to the sound of Stella babbling happily in her crib, and Jasper's determined attempts to climb out of his own bed, their sweet morning chatter the most wonderful alarm clock she could imagine. Today, she would marry Victor Voss in the rose garden where they'd fallen in love, surrounded by the flowers that had witnessed their courtship, and the friends who'd supported them through the storms that had tested their commitment. More importantly, today Stella and Jasper would officially become Voss children, gaining not just a father's name but the security of knowing they belonged to a family that would never abandon them. Mrs. Langley arrived at the cottage before Layla had finished her coffee, arms full of garment bags and flowers, her silver hair perfectly arranged, and her eyes bright with the joy of someone who'd helped orchestrate countless perfect days but never one quite so meaningful. "Good morning, bride," she said warmly, kissing Layla's cheek before scooping up Stella, who immediately began examining the pearl buttons on Mrs. Langley's cardigan with serious concentration. "Are you ready to become Mrs. Voss?" "More than ready," Layla replied, lifting Jasper onto her hip and marveling at how much her life had changed since that stormy night 13 months ago. "Where's Victor?" "Pacing the music room like a caged tiger and asking me every 5 minutes if you've changed your mind." "Mrs." Langley laughed. "I finally banished him to his study with strict orders not to emerge until it's time for the ceremony." The morning passed in a blur of beautiful chaos. Layla's wedding dress hung waiting in her closet, not the elaborate gown she might have chosen in her youth, but something perfect for a woman marrying for love rather than show. It was ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace sleeves and a neckline that showcased her grandmother's pearl, simple, elegant, and perfect for a garden ceremony. Stella's flower girl dress was a miniature version in pale pink, with tiny silk roses sewn along the hem. Jasper's little suit matched his soon-to-be father's, complete with a bow tie that he kept trying to pull off despite Mrs. Langley's patient corrections. "You look like a fairy tale princess, Mama," said a familiar voice from the cottage doorway. Layla turned to see her former colleague Elena from the clinic, radiant in a blue dress that complemented her dark hair. Elena had become one of Layla's closest friends during the difficult months of pregnancy and had insisted on traveling from Chicago to witness the wedding. "Elena," Layla cried, embracing her friend carefully to avoid wrinkling either of their dresses. "I can't believe you're here." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Elena replied, producing a small wrapped box. "Something blue from your maternity ward family." Inside was a delicate blue silk garter embroidered with tiny stars, along with a note signed by all the nurses who'd cared for Layla during her pregnancy. "For our brave girl who found her happy ending." As noon approached, the cottage filled with the gentle bustle of final preparations. Mrs. Langley arranged Layla's hair in a soft updo that showcased the antique pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, while Elena helped wrangle the twins into their wedding outfits. "They're getting restless," Elena observed, as Jasper escaped her attempts to comb his dark curls. And Stella began fussing over her tiny shoes. "Maybe we should head to the garden," Layla said, standing before her bedroom mirror for one final look. The woman gazing back at her bore little resemblance to the scared, desperate girl who'd collapsed outside a clinic in the rain. This woman glowed with happiness and confidence, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely and about to marry her best friend. "You're radiant, Mrs." Langley said softly, appearing behind her in the mirror. "Your grandmother would be so proud." "She is proud," Layla replied, touching the pearls at her throat. "I can feel her blessing on today." The walk through the gardens to the ceremony site felt like floating through a dream. The rose garden had been transformed into something magical. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arbor of climbing roses creating a natural altar, and petals scattered along the grass pathway like nature's own carpet. Their guests were few but precious: Elena, Mrs. Langley, Victor's business partner Thomas and his wife, and the minister who'd agreed to perform both the wedding ceremony and the adoption proceedings, Stella Rodon Mrs. Langley's hip, while Elena held Jasper's hand to keep him from wandering into the flower beds. Then Layla saw Victor waiting at the altar, and everything else faded away. He stood beneath the rose arbor in a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his tall frame and storm-colored eyes, his dark hair gleaming in the sunshine, and his expression radiating pure joy. This was the man who'd carried her through a literal storm and then spent 13 months proving that love could conquer any obstacle. This was the father who'd chosen her children before he'd even known if she would choose him. This was her future, her forever, her heart's home. As the string quartet began playing the melody Victor had composed for her, Layla walked down the petal-strewn aisle, carrying Stella while Jasper toddled beside them, occasionally stopping to examine interesting flowers until Elena gently guided him forward. The music was the same haunting tune Victor had hummed the night the twins were born, the song that had become the soundtrack of their love story. When she reached the altar, Victor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered, taking Stella from her arms and settling their daughter on his hip as if she belonged there, which, of course, she did. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. We are gathered here today to witness not just the union of two hearts, but the creation of a family bound by love rather than blood, by choice rather than circumstance. The vows they exchanged were the same ones they'd written in their letters to each other during the darkest days of their legal battle promises that had sustained them through every storm and would guide them through all the years to come. "Victor," Layla said, her voice clear and strong despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her, "I promise to love you in sunshine and storm, in triumph and trial, in all the ordinary moments that make up a life together. I promise to be your partner in building dreams and raising children, your companion in growing old together. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." "Layla," Victor replied, his voice rough with emotion as he held Stella while Jasper climbed onto his feet to be closer to the action. "I promise to protect and cherish you and our children, to build a home where love is the foundation. And laughter fills every room. I promise to be the father Stella and Jasper deserve, to love them as fiercely as if they'd been born from my own heart. I promise to spend every day proving worthy of the miracle you've given me." When they exchanged Ringshi's grandmother's diamond for her, a platinum band engraved with Persian poetry for him, Stella clapped her tiny hands while Jasper babbled what sounded suspiciously like "da" at exactly the right moment, making everyone laugh through their tears. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts," the minister announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Victor, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promises, while Stella giggled and Jasper tried to climb higher up his father's leg for a better view. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing simultaneously, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. But the ceremony wasn't over. The minister produced the adoption papers that would make Stella and Jasper officially Victor's children, giving them his name and all the legal protections that came with it. "Do you, Victor Voss, swear to love, protect, and provide for Stella Rose Carter and Jasper James Carter as if they were your natural-born children, to be their father in every sense of the word for as long as you live?" "I do," Victor said firmly, his voice carrying across the garden with absolute conviction. "I swear it." "And do you, Layla Voss, consent to the adoption of your children by your husband, knowing that this will give him all the rights and responsibilities of parenthood?" "I do," Layla replied, tears streaming down her face as she watched Stella reach for Victor's face, while Jasper wrapped his small arms around his father's leg. "With all my heart." Then, by signing these documents, Stella Rose Carter and Jasper James Carter become Stella Rose Voss and Jasper James Voss, with all the rights and privileges thereof. As Victor signed the papers that made him legally the twins' father, Stella seemed to understand the gravity of the moment and went completely still in his arms, her amber eyes serious as she watched the pen move across the page. Jasper, not to be outdone, added his own contribution by grabbing the pen and making enthusiastic scribbles at the bottom of the document, officially signing his approval of the adoption. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced with a broad smile, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Victor Voss and their children, Stella and Jasper. May this family find joy in every season and strength in every storm." The reception was intimate and perfect, held on the cottage terrace overlooking the gardens where their love had bloomed. Mrs. Langley had outdone herself with a menu that included Persian specialties in honor of Layla's heritage, while Elena regaled everyone with stories of Layla's pregnancy that made Victor alternately laugh and look horrified that he'd missed those difficult months. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Victor and Layla found themselves alone on the terrace while their guests entertained the twins inside. The cottage glowed with warm light behind them, and the garden stretched out before them like a promise of all the beautiful tomorrows they would share. "Mrs. Voss," Victor said, pulling her into his arms for a dance to music only they could hear. "How does it feel to be married?" "Perfect," Layla replied, settling into his embrace as if she'd been made to fit there. "How does it feel to be a father?" "Like everything I've ever done was just preparation for this moment," he said, spinning her gently as fireflies began to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Like my whole life was just a story leading up to the night I found you in the storm." "Speaking of stories," Layla said with a smile that held secrets, "I have something to tell you." "What's that?" "The doctors called yesterday with the results of my annual physical," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief and joy. "It seems that love really can work miracles. We're going to have a baby, Victor. Stella and Jasper are going to be big siblings. Victor stopped dancing, his expression cycling through shock, wonder, and pure elation. Really? You're sure? Very sure. Layla laughed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Due in December, a Christmas baby to complete our family. A baby? Victor repeated, his voice filled with awe. Our baby, made from love instead of luck. Are you happy? Layla asked, though his radiant expression had already answered her question. Happy? Victor lifted her off her feet and spun her around until they were both dizzy with laughter. Layla, I thought I had everything I could ever want, and now you're telling me we're going to have more. How did I get so blessed? We got blessed, she corrected, settling back into his arms. All of us together, Stella and Jasper, and you and me and the baby who's going to grow up knowing nothing but love and security and parents who chose each other every single day. As they danced under the stars in the garden where they'd found their happy ending, the future stretched before them like an open book waiting to be written. There would be more children, more laughter, more storms weathered together, and more joy shared as a family. There would be teenagers and graduations and weddings of their own children someday. But tonight, on their wedding night, they were simply Victor and Layla Voss, dancing in their garden, while their children slept peacefully inside, and their newest blessing grew quietly beneath Layla's heart. They had found their forever in each other's arms, had built their family from love and determination and the kind of faith that moves mountains. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but its gift would last for all the years to comb a love story that proved fairy tales really do exist for those brave enough to believe in magic and strong enough to fight for their dreams. And as the last notes of their imaginary music faded into the night, Layla and Victor held each other close and whispered promises to the stars, knowing that their greatest adventures were just beginning